Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for sitting patiently while I figured out what my right and my left are. No, I got it wrong again. My right and my left? Anyway, thank you for sitting patiently while I figured out how to make the computer work. Just to be clear, manage expectations early on, which is a theme we're going to talk about a little bit. This is not a technical talk. This is not about the technical response in crisis management. If you are jonesing for a technical talk, I'll give you a minute, you can hop up and walk out. That is not what you're going to get here. We're going to talk about the other part of crisis management, the management part, which is the bit that often doesn't come quite so naturally to technical people. And that's why I'm here. So who the hell am I? Well, firstly, I'm somebody that discovered you can really find anything on the internet, including a cat ass trophy. I also apparently like pictures of cats. But I am not a crazy cat lady, no matter what anyone tells you. So I'm Jen Ellis. I work at Rapid7. And part of my job at Rapid7 is that I manage crisis. So when something happens, and clearly nothing bad ever happens at Rapid7, don't worry. If you're a customer, we're perfect. But should something happen, I would be the person who would basically boss everyone else around. I'm very good at bossing people around. And I've also, I came from a communications background, and I had a strong focus on reputation management, and I've worked with actually a lot of different companies on crisis response. And more recently, when Rapid7 launched incident response services, if we had a customer who said, hey, we also need help with the non-technical side, I would be the person drafted in. So I've worked with a lot of different companies on crisis response. So what do we mean about crisis? And here's the thing, if you read pretty much any headline ever, you will know that as a security professional, you're super unlikely to be able to avoid crisis forever. I think the latest stats say you're 728% likely to have a breach in the next 5 minutes. So you guys should probably not be here. You should be off dealing with the breaches. So it could be a breach. It could be a vulnerability. It could be somebody internally doing something really stupid. We had one of those recently, I will tell you about a little bit. Whatever the situation is, crises come up. They happen all the time. And as security professionals, it's a reality specifically of your world. And while you may be more naturally oriented towards the technical response, the chances are that you may have to help or participate in the sort of larger response. Bad news, I really like audience participation. So I'm gonna ask quick show of hands. How many people in the room think that they have worked on a security crisis at some point? All right, a lot of you. How many people feel like they nailed it? Awesome. How many people work for a security company? Okay, so for all of those of you who don't work at security companies, the chances are that if you have a security incident, the other parts of your business are going to be less familiar with the dynamics of security incidents, and you're going to have to take more of a leadership role. You're going to have to help coach them. You're going to have to get into territory that you don't normally think of as yours. The chances are your comms team, if you're not at a security company, probably not experts on how to communicate around a breach. Probably also not experts on how to communicate to security professionals. But you guys are security professionals, hopefully. You guys are security professionals, right? I didn't come to the wrong conference. Okay, somebody over there is. So you can help them. You can tell them, what do you as a security professional want to hear? What do you need to know in a situation where you're on the receiving end? So you're going to end up having to get involved one way or another. So that's why we're here. So we're going to talk about 6 things, which is an awkward number. I tried to do 5, but there were just too many. I tried to do 7 because it's Rapid7. 6 is what it is, okay? We're just going to suck it up. So I'm going to walk through each of these individual items one by one. And I will say, like, the legal requirements piece is really sort of part of planning, but it's so important that I called it out as a separate thing. So let's get started. We'll just dive straight into it. So the first thing, and I cannot underscore this enough, is above all, you need to start planning. Preparation, preparation, preparation. It is the most important thing you can do. So again, show of hands, how many people have a crisis response plan in their organization? Oh, that is pitiful, people. Come on now. All right, how many people who have a crisis response plan think that it's really good? And again, I'm just gonna keep my arm down because like we're working on revamping ours right now. Okay, good, one brave soul thinks this is really good. How many people have participated in a crisis preparation tabletop exercise? Okay, better show of hands there. More than one? All right, okay. So it gives you an idea that where we need to be is not where we are today. And here's the thing. Nobody really wants to get caught in like a snowstorm in the middle of winter with no plan, right? Like you don't want to be the adorable, fuzzy, terrifying lion. You want to get into a situation where you have a plan in advance and you've figured out some of the difficult questions. Because in the heat of the moment, when you're scrambling, trying to like build trust, trying to figure out who has responsibility for what, trying to figure out what the workflow should be, all of that stuff in the heat of the moment is 8,000 times, my stats are very accurate, by the way, it's 8,000 times worse than it is if you can do it calmly and rationally when you're not dealing with people breathing down your neck. So preparation is like the most fundamental thing you can do. So what does preparation mean? Like, how do you get going? I think the first step is that you really want to build an overwhelming and totally terrifying workflow that nobody can read. This is, by the way, this is not something that I expect you to like take a photo of and go back to your companies and be like, I've got the workflow template, guys. Like, we're sorted. So this is a real workflow that Rapid7 used at one point in the past. And the process that we went through to create this is, firstly, we had to figure out who are our core stakeholders. In any crisis response, so actually, let me take a step back. The first step is figuring out what kind of crises you might reasonably face as an organization. What does crisis mean to you? What kind of situations are you thinking about? Like, is it a breach scenario? Is it a vulnerability disclosure? Is it something completely different? Are you really worried about malicious internal actors? Like, what does that look like? So determine what your key crisis scenarios are. Once you have that, for each of those scenarios, you want to think, who are the players in the organization that most need to be involved? And I'll tell you, like, this is a very fine balancing act because you want to make sure you have a good, strong cross-functional team, but you don't want to have hundreds of people across the organization. In a crisis, being able to move quickly and efficiently is paramount. They're having a lot more fun in the other room. I'm sorry, guys. And in French as well, so I'm doubly sorry. Pardonnez-moi. And I promised I wouldn't do franglais today, but there it is. But yeah, so you want to know, like, who is it from the legal team that's going to be your go-to person? Who is it from IT, from engineering, from the security team who needs to be involved? Who is your executive liaison? How many of the execs are going to want to be kept informed? Who is it from the communications team? Is there somebody from customer support, somebody from customer management? Does somebody from HR need to be involved? These are all questions you need to figure out in advance to start to build an idea of who your stakeholders are. Once you do that, you get the core stakeholders in a room together and you basically walk through what does it look like from beginning to end. And this process is not going to be quick. It's not going to be smooth. And it's not going to be like a one hit and done thing. It's going to be something you iterate on and iterate on and iterate on. But you can start walking through the scenarios and really kind of testing yourself and asking each other questions, trying to figure out what do you each need in a situation that, would classify as a crisis. Like, what does the comms person most need? When do they need to be brought in? the chances are, I'm guessing, most of you are not best buddies with the comms people in your organization. So again, quick show of hands, how many people speak regularly to the comms people in their organization? Yeah. That's normal, by the way. That's what I figured. Okay, so you're going to have to do something about that to like start building this up. So once you have a workflow, you can start determining roles and responsibilities. Again, this is absolutely your template. Like you have this now, you can go and use it. It's great. It's an eye chart, and it just gives you an example. This is something again that we used for a period of time at Rapid7. We specifically adopted the RACI model for roles and responsibilities. Are people familiar with the RACI model? Ish? Yeah, okay. There are lots of different roles and responsibilities type models. Google will happily tell you about all of them. Find the one that works for your organization. For us, what we wanted to clarify is in every scenario, who is responsible and accountable, who is providing input, who are the final approvers. We wanted to go through all of the different elements and figure out like exactly what the expectations were. And actually the process of creating this for us was quite eye-opening. We had situations in the creation of this horrendous chart where we had teams that butted heads and were like, well, hang on a second, I own that. No, I own that. We had this moment where our product marketing team was like, if it's a vulnerability, we own all messaging around product. So we own the story, we own the custom communication. The comms team were like, but like it's kind of in our name, we're the communications team. Like it's kind of what we do, so we should have like ultimate say. You should be providing input about the product message and we should own the whole thing. And so there was this like sort of tension internally. Now you don't want that tension when you're actually in the heat of the moment, pushing to get a message out as quickly as possible. You want to have figured all that stuff out in advance. And the problem is if you don't, you run the risk of one of two things happening. Either you're going to bash heads, you're going to rub each other up the wrong way, and the end result will suffer. You won't get a good product out the door. Or the other thing will happen, and I am in Canada, so you'll be terribly polite to each other, and you'll be like, no, 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 after you. And nothing will get done. So you have to like make sure that you have talked through these things directly and openly in advance, and you've figured out how to like come to some consensus on who's doing what. A key part of that is you need to make friends. And like if there's one thing I can tell you after you like get back to the office on Monday, the thing to go do is to go make friends with other people who might be core stakeholders who you've never spoken to before. It doesn't matter if they're a duck and you're a kitten. Like you still can be great friends, you can have great fluffy moments together. You need to go back and like, go talk to your GC's office, find out who in the GC's office is the person who would work on a crisis response. Take them out for lunch. I'm a really big believer in if I don't know someone, just buying them lunch, which means all of you are gonna tell me that I have to buy you lunch after this. But like that is a great way of getting to know people. Sit down with them and say, hey, so this is how I think about this. What do you care about when this situation happens? Find out what their job is like. Find out like what the pressures are of their job, what the challenges are they face, what do they worry about? Because if you understand those pieces in advance, you can start to build trust. Not only can you start to build trust, but you can start to play as an actual team, figuring out who's offense, who's defense, how do you work together? I've given a version of this talk in the past, and normally when I present it with Rapid7's CSO. And when he first joined the company, we did not like instantly, look at each other and our eyes met across the room and we fell blatantly in love with each other. It wasn't like that. To begin with, we irritated the shit out of each other. And the reality is Heartbleed happened and we sucked it up and we worked through it. And at the end, we sat down and we were like, that could have gone better. And we had a really honest conversation about what we could have done better, and we figured out how to improve. And by doing that, we started to get to a point where he had an understanding of what the things were that I cared about and needed, and I had an understanding of what he cared about and needed. By the time he actually moved on to DigitalOcean, and it breaks my heart. But by the time that he moved on, we were at a point where Annoyingly, we finished each other's sentences. And what that meant was that if I was traveling or he was traveling and something happened, we actually could step in for each other. It meant that, like, if a decision needed to be made really quickly in the heat of the moment and one of us was not available for some reason, we had each other's backs and we knew exactly what the other person would think about and need and how to, like, take that thinking into the process. It didn't mean that we did each other's jobs. You know, I wasn't like an interim CSO for Rapid7, no matter what I tell you when I'm drunk. It was just that I knew what Josh cared about most, and I knew how to represent that and factor it into my thinking, and he was the same. And that meant that we could move much faster. It meant that the end result for our end users was much better. So go make friends. This is your number one action takeaway. Go do that. So another core part of planning is that you need to know and understand what the legal requirements are going to be for any of your core scenarios. So, and I'm sorry, like, we're in Canada and I do not know anything about the Canadian legislation on this, so I apologize. I can tell you that for people who are doing business in the US, there are now 54 different state and territory regulations on this. 54. It's insane to keep up with it. And then how many people have customers in Europe or interact with European persons, as the regulation calls them? I'm going to tell you it's more than that. I'm going to tell you you all are covered by GDPR, and you need to check it out if you don't already know about it. And the great fun thing about GDPR is it requires notification in 72 hours. Most of the times that I have worked on an investigation, I feel like the team isn't even ready to definitively say what happened in 72 hours, and you have to do your notification in that window. So you need to understand these requirements. There are also vertical sector requirements, certainly for healthcare and for financial sector, probably for a lot of other sectors. So you really need to be up on this, and you need to make sure that your legal team is. And that's, again, when you go and take them out for lunch, this is a question you can ask. It's like, have you looked at these things? Is there something I can do to help with that? How are you thinking about this? It's really important to understand what your organization's attitude towards regulation is before you get into these situations. You want to know what their sort of tolerance around disclosure and transparency is, because it will shape how you move forward with the rest of the response. So, okay, you've done your planning. As a big part of your planning, you figured out who your core stakeholders are going to be, who that core team is that's going to work on any response. But there's more than just that group that are stakeholders. In most response situations, there's also an executive group that are stakeholders, and they want to know what's going on. You have to figure out very carefully, how are you going to communicate with them effectively? What does that look like? Do you tell them everything that's going on all the time? Do you try and hold back some information? Is it all of the execs or just some subset of execs? How many people have interacted or communicated with their executive team? Okay, how many people find the idea of telling their executive team about a security crisis terrifying? You need to, like, figure out how to make this work for you, and you know, you need to figure out who is going to be the person in your response team, who's like your response captain, who's the person who's going to be the guy or the lady who's going to manage the response. I'm very good at this. I gesticulate wildly. You need to know who that person is. We had a situation recently, and we had a response captain, and the response captain quite reasonably had vacation planned. And so halfway through, the response captain went on vacation. And then we had a situation where the rest of us didn't figure out who was the response captain. And so I was like, is it you? Is it me? Wait, you're going to send an email? I'm going to send it. Who's sending the email? Like, I don't know what's happening. And it actually did create friction. Like, it created like a little bit of weirdness because I didn't want to overstep, and he's new and he didn't want to overstep. And so again, we're being terribly polite to each other, but mainly we're like, what's going on? So you need to figure those things out. You also need to figure out a cadence. Like, I think on the last situation we had, we probably over-communicated with the execs. When you're sending emails being like, there's no update, it's not that useful. So you need to figure those things out and, like, have a sense of what do the execs expect to see. You also need to figure out, like, who are your other stakeholders. So, for example, in most situations that you deal with, you might have a support team or support leadership as your stakeholders. You might have your customer management group as stakeholders. And you need to think, if they're stakeholders, what does it mean for them to be stakeholders? At what point should they be brought into the process? How are you going to communicate with them? What does that look like? The other core piece around managing stakeholders is you have to remember that perception is everything, and that people are not stupid, and they generally pay attention to what's around them-ish in the workplace. And they build conspiracy theories. We're great at this. And so there's this whole, there's a phrase around like making like a swan, you know, you like glide on the surface and paddle like hell under the water. You basically need to figure out how to master that. Because if you're running around looking like very crazed and worried and stressed, the people around you will notice. And they will start to build theories around what's happening, and they will become disproportionate to whatever is actually happening. And then you'll have an issue where, rather than being able to just focus on your response, your technical response, the thing you need to get on with, you'll be fielding questions from 800 people who want to know what's happening, and then trying to deal with managing perceptions. So you need to think about, like, what is the part that you play on this? Like, how are you communicating non-verbally? Are you like huddling very visibly with other people looking very stressed? Secret meetings are so tempting for other people to look at and go, ooh, what's happening there? And the next thing you know, there'll be speculation that you're being acquired or something, because that's how minds work. So you need to really think about those pieces. Okay, so you've got your plan, you've figured out your stakeholders, a situation has arisen, you start to put your plan in place. It is really critical that you monitor the situation and you adapt as you go. The plan is very important. I think I mentioned that once or twice. But a very important additional part is flexibility and agility. You can't get so locked into what's written down that you can't respond to what's happening. And in order to do that, you need to figure out, how are you going to monitor it effectively? So for example, do you have somebody who is monitoring social media? And if so, are they doing it in the most effective way possible? So as an example, Iron Mountain, I think it was, had a situation where they had a fire at one of their facilities, huge fire. And when the first responders came in, they obviously they put the fire out, which is great. And then there were all these like partially charred bits of paper everywhere. And so it was like all along a riverbed. And so people were like kind of walking down, and they would just like find bits of paper that had confidential information on them. And so the team that worked on that response, they had to figure out, how do we know when somebody's done that and they've put it on the internet? Because like the chances are they're not gonna like take a picture of it, put it on Twitter and put #Iron Mountain. So what are you searching for to try and like find those pieces? Bear in mind, the chances are you're going to deal with a litigious situation, and that these things could be used as proof or evidence against you in the courtroom. So you really need to think like, okay, how are we going to like get this evidence capture and make sure that we're finding these things when people are not necessarily going to use the keywords we want them to use to make our lives easier? So you need to think a little bit laterally and like really work with whoever manages the monitoring. Like, is it your comms team? Who else is it? Another thing is, so I promised you that I would talk to you about a recent situation at Rapid7. So we had a situation whereby we did a survey of some of our users on a particular product. And the data from that survey was accidentally put on a public GitHub repository. And it is like the simplest thing in the world, whereby one person said to another, okay, put that file on GitHub, meaning Rapid7's incredibly private GitHub repository, and the other person didn't know that we had one, and so put it on her personal GitHub. Humans, right, do these things with no malintent whatsoever, and yet there we are, we have some data accidentally out. in public. And so we had to scramble to figure out what to do about it and like how to respond. Now, we found out about it because a customer that used a threat intelligence feed got it from their threat intelligence feed. They were like, hey, this looks like it's your data. And so the customer came and told us. And so like we had this big scramble to figure out like what the hell was going on and get the stuff taken down and then figure out how to communicate to anyone affected. In the process, we overlooked talking to support. And we didn't talk to support until we were at the point where we were ready to make the public communication. So then we got support involved and we were like, hey, we're going to do this thing. And support were like, that's great. Thanks for letting us know. And we sent out the emails. And one of the customers came back and they were like, yeah, I reported this to your support team a week ago. And we were like, really? That sucks. It would have been good to know about that. And that was because we didn't connect the dots. Like we didn't think about who all of our stakeholders would be, and we didn't think about the role that they play in helping us monitor a situation. If we'd brought support in at the beginning, they would have told us, they would have known to look out for people reporting the issue, and they would have said to us, hey, we've had this other customer report it, and we would have been like, oh crap, we should totally talk to that customer. And instead, oh, by the way, I swear a lot. And instead we didn't do that. And so this other customer was like, thanks for ignoring me for a week on this thing that you did. And that's not great. Like that doesn't fill any of us with warm fuzzies. We feel like that's a pretty bad exercise. So you need to think about who all the people are in your organization that help with monitoring and think laterally about it as much as possible. It won't be as simple as it being one team that does X. You need to really sort of think about all the different aspects that go into it and make sure that you're then able to respond as things come up. Your internal team is very important. They are your front line. They are your... No, I'm not going to get any hoes from any of you. All right, fine. Whatever. I get it, you want lunch. So you need to think about how you arm them to be as effective as possible. Clearly, I just gave an example of where we did that really poorly with the support team. So generally speaking, what we try and do with any situation is we try and create an FAQ to give to our CSMs, sometimes our sales team, the support team, anybody that is on the front line of interacting with users, so that they are prepared to answer questions as much as possible. So if somebody comes to them like worried and stressed, they're not going to get like a, oh, I don't know, kind of a response. So you need to think about like, how are you arming your people to do that? You also need to think about the fact that your internal team will be worried themselves, particularly if they see reports of something and they haven't heard anything from you internally. So you have to think about when is the right time to communicate with the internal team. And again, as people who have like more point of view on security, more experience in this, this is an area where you can demonstrate leadership to your comms team and you can help them understand what the right approach is to take. When we have a situation and we create the FAQ, it is a complete collaboration between the security team, the comms team, and then depending on the situation, either IT or engineering. And like the security team provide a lot of input into that document, and it's invaluable. Without them, we would not get to such a crisp, clear articulation of what's going on. So you have a role to play in this. Don't think about the fact that like it's not a technical response, therefore it's not my job. Okay, so this is the bit that everybody thinks about when they think about like how you do communications around crisis. They think about like going to the public, and they particularly think about media engagement. I kind of put this as a lower thing. Oftentimes, if you manage a situation well, you won't even need to deal with this piece. But it's always good to be prepared for it and to think about it and to know how you're going to deal with it. I will say with this piece, the key aspects are you need to think very carefully about timing. You need to understand whether the situation you're dealing with is already being discussed in the public domain, and that will affect your timing. And then you need to think about like, what is the right message in terms of like giving too much information, giving too little information. I'll give you like a quick, like sort of semi-funny anecdote about this. About 7 years ago, Rapid7's DNS was hijacked by the Syrian Electronic Army, who it turns out don't know how to spell Palestine, amusingly. And when we were doing the investigation, our DNS provider gave us some information to begin with that, like, I think there was a crossed wire, or we misinterpreted the information, or they said something that was a little bit misleading. But basically, we got the impression that they had been social engineered through a fax. And so we were like, hacking like it's 1968. And our CSO at the time, a guy called HD Moore, some of you might have heard of him, he said to me, "This is kind of hilarious, can I tweet it?" And I had this moment where I was like, HD knows everything about security. So if he thinks it's okay, it's totes legit. And so it's like, yeah, sure, go for it. And then it turned out, obviously, like, yes, some of you look at me like, you're a fucking moron. I am a fucking moron. Guess what, guys? It turned out not to be a fax. Shocking. Now, in this situation, we like put out another tweet and said, hey, it wasn't that. It was something much more mundane. And no harm was done. Like, no one really cared. They thought it was funny that it was a fax. When they found out it wasn't a fax, they were like, oh, boo. And they moved on. This wasn't a harmful situation because there was actually no customer impact, right? Like, our homepage got defaced with some misspellings, and we took it down pretty quickly and got it fixed, and like nobody really cared in the grand scheme of things. But it is a lesson that if you communicate too quickly, if you communicate before you've verified the situation, if you don't have really good rigor in your communications and your relationship with communications, you have the potential to miscommunicate. And in most situations, it will be far more damaging than it was in our somewhat ridiculous situation. And it's also a lesson in, again, as security professionals, the chances are your comms team will think that on the topic of security, that you are godlike and that you know everything. And it's really important for you to manage that with them and be clear on, like, what are the things that you do know and what are the things that you don't know. And, you know, if you're like, hey, I think we should go and talk about this, like, really think about, like, is that the right thing? Because the chances are your comms team will be like, okay, that seems reasonable because I have no clue. So you need to, I don't know whether they will talk a little bit like Scooby-Doo, but they do. So you need to really think about, like, how to manage that piece. So a couple of other things to think about as you're doing the external is, and this is my number one golden rule for all crisis communications of any kind, is always focus on those who are affected. And you can do this in your technical response and your communications response. So, are there things that you as an organization can do from a technical point of view to address the issue for them and make it easy for them? For example, if they need to reset their password, can you just force a reset? Because then, like, you're not really making them make a choice. They, like, have to do it. It'll be annoying, but it's better for security. So if that's the thing you think they should do, don't just say, hey, go change your password. Like, actually say, your password has been reset, you need to go and take steps. Think about those kinds of things. In the communications, also think about, do they need a full technical exposition of what happened? Probably not. Is a full technical exposition going to scare the bejesus out of them and confuse most of them? Probably. So think about, who is your end customer? What is the right approach for them? Quick anecdote on this one. 2 years ago, we did some research on the Johnson & Johnson Animas One Touch Ping, which is a very catchy name for an insulin pump. Basically, the way it works is the insulin pump attaches to you bodily, and it delivers insulin, as the name kind of suggests. There is a remote control like gadget that goes in your pocket that monitors your insulin level, and it communicates via RFC with the pump and says, hey, you need to dispense insulin, right? We basically discovered that you could interfere with that communication to either, like, stop insulin delivery, which might lead in death, or you could emulate the communication and push a fatal dose. So, like, generally not great scenarios. However, in order to do that, you would need to have the right equipment, know that the person has that particular device, and be within a certain proximity of them and have the technical capabilities. So in other words, we're not talking about, like, drive-by attacks here. We're talking about something super, super targeted. So the chances are that most people's risk profile means they're probably not going to be the target of a hacking assassin. So when we did the communication out, we worked really, really closely with Johnson & Johnson. They did make the decision to proactively communicate to their patients, which was the first time that a US medical device manufacturer has ever done that for cybersecurity, which was 2 thumbs up, very cool. But we all worked together to get a communication that went out saying, hey, don't pull your insulin pumps out. Like, that is not the right response, because you know what will kill you? Diabetes. So don't do that. And so we had this like very sort of like clear communication that said, here's the risk, here's what you can do about it, do not panic. It was very Hitchhikers, do not panic in big capitals. And because we took that approach, the patients came back to us and they were like, thank you. We really appreciate the fact that you made this really clear for us. You made it easy for us to understand what the right thing was to do. And then the FDA came and said, this was really great, guys. We want everyone to follow your example, which Johnson & Johnson were like, what just happened? Oh, that's great. Let's do that more. So that's how you do a vulnerability disclosure and make people happy. And so, which is very uncommon. So again, like use your guiding principle around how do you focus on those who are affected. When we were going through that disclosure, there were definitely times where, Johnson & Johnson, which is like, an amazingly enormous organization with lots of lawyers, and Rapid7, which is like a tiny amoeba on the edge of the galaxy, where we were like, oh, yeah, we're going to argue with you, but you're very big and scary. We don't know what to do. And they would say, well, we think it should be this. And I'd be like, yeah, okay, so you are big and scary, but like we've done a lot of disclosures and that's wrong. It's not the way to do it. And so we had these moments, right, where we were like bashing heads against each other. And in every one of those situations, the thing that brought us to alignment is we sat down and we were like, what is the best thing for the patients? That was our unifying factor. So again, like use this as your guiding principle. Always think about like, what are the right things to tell them? When's it the right time to tell them? And above all, like be authentic in how you do it. Like really think about like, who are your customers? How do you interact with them? What feels right to you? Don't try and bullshit people. People know. Like how many of you have seen security advisories and got annoyed with how it's written? I have, definitely. Oh, none of you? Really? Wow, you are much nicer to vendors than I am. All right, well, in which case, do whatever you want. Ignore me. But I think it's critical to be authentic. Okay, so that was a lot of information that I just went through. I blathered at you for a good solid 40 minutes. But like the bottom line here is, these are pretty simple rules. Like I'm now down to, I think, 5 of them. So number 1 is preparation, make friends. This is the thing you're gonna do when you get back to the office, is you're gonna identify one person to go and like learn about and build a relationship with that is not in the security team. The second is timing is super important. Figuring out when to talk, how to talk, what to say, what the medium is, all that kind of stuff. Don't be overconfident and tell people that you got hacked via fax. Think about what the information is that is the right information to share. Don't make it like if you're dealing with consumers like regular Joes, don't give them loads of technical information they're not going to understand. It'll terrify them. If you're dealing with security professionals, focus on what they need to do. Make it actionable for them. Think through the questions people will have and try to like proactively come up with answers. Don't be caught in that situation of being like, you need to like, there are obvious questions people ask. And the best thing you can do is think about the shittiest questions you're going to get. When we did the GitHub thing, we knew we were going to get bad questions. We knew people were going to be like, you did what now? And they were going to have a whole raft of questions about it. Mostly, how could you be so stupid? And so we needed to have like good answers prepared to say, yeah, we like mea culpa, we totally messed this up, but here's what we're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. This is how we're addressing it. And, as I said, that last one, like above everything else that you do, you need to really think about what's in the best interests of the people that are affected by it. And if you do all of that, you will get through your cat astrophe in one piece. You will weather it, probably with minimal fallout, until some bozo from your team goes out and does a talk about all the bad things that have happened in your organization. So thank you very much. If you have questions, I'll be around. Please let me know. As you can see, I'm super approachable and happy to talk to you. Just warm and fuzzy. Thank you.